Good morning. One of those weird days where you get all the little kids gathered up and they haven't seen cousins and uncles and everybody for a long time, and they get so super excited, and then we come to church and say, shh. So I totally understand, okay, because I know how that is. But it's good to be able to get together on a today, Christmas Eve. You know, we get things about this holiday so tangled up. We get all the traditions, the secularized traditions about Santa Claus and gift giving and buying and all that kind of stuff. We get that tangled up with the real significance of the birth of Christ. I think it's good that we stop once in a while. Could y'all turn that down just a little bit? It's echoing just a tiny bit. But it's good to be able to get that focus on Christ and who Christ is. And I love Sean's song service so far. You know, we have the Christmas carols, the songs that really focus on the birth of Christ, but I think he's done a tremendous job of integrating those other songs of praise to remind us that it's not just about tiny babies being born in innocence in the world. This is the Christ. This is the Savior who's being born into the world, and God is really making a difference. There is a certain freedom in biblical stories. There's often not that much descriptive detail in the Bible stories. They just kind of give you the bare facts, the things you need to know, and it's almost as though it's left up to you to start thinking about exactly what this looked like, and we all tend to imagine them differently. I always enjoy looking at great artworks and to see how the different artists conceive of different things. And of course, they always have things running in the background, you know, little agendas. They're painting it for a certain church in a certain place, or for an orphanage, or they're painting it for an altar piece, or something that they're being told you need to include these things. You will always find them including patrons, the people who paid for the paintings. They will somehow be involved in the painting somewhere. There will be a picture or a portrait, or somebody the artist doesn't like. And there will be some buffoon somewhere, you know, hiding out in the background looking stupid, and it's one of the artist's enemies. This particular painting here is called The Nativity by Domenico Ghirlandaio. Ghirlandaio focused a lot on painting these sorts of things. He was almost like a traveling artist who went around to different places and painted nativity scene. But I am fascinated. I really love this particular painting, because he's just a really technically precise, really good artist. And so he does a tremendous job of showing things like Mary, you know, the beauty of Mary. And of course, in all of these paintings that are by Catholics especially, Mary is always shown. I don't know how you looked, ladies, when you had your first child, but I figure you looked like somebody had taken a ball bat and just pounded you with it, you know, exhausted, tired, all of those things that go hurting, that go with giving birth. And instead, Mary is always shown pristine and lovely and perfect. And the reason for that is because of this Catholic focus on the perpetual virginity of Mary. She didn't give birth like you gave birth. She may have given birth like I did, but nevertheless, you know, it was very, very beautiful, very, very, very calm, very easily done. And so when Mary is finished giving birth to Christ, she remains a virgin, and so she is pristine and pure. And eventually some of these artists will be wanting to paint Mary the way they thought she probably looked after giving birth to a child. And those artists always nearly got run out of town on a rail, but nevertheless, that's what you have. Of course, you have the Christ child who's lying here. You have the artist himself right here pointing toward the Christ child. You have a couple of the patrons who paid for this particular altar piece who are there. There is the shepherds. This one actually is about the adoration of the shepherds. So you have the shepherds up there being, the angel is announcing to the shepherds that the Christ child has come. What I find fascinating about this painting, though, is here come the three wise men. Or actually, at this particular time, there weren't just three wise men, there were more. But look at the big parade that is coming down the avenue to come and see this Christ child. And that's really Ghirlandaio's way of saying the whole world is affected by what has happened here in this birth of this child. There are all of the Old Testament prophecies about how the nations will bring all of their treasures and come and worship. And so you have not just these kings or these magi who are coming to worship the Christ child, you have the entire world coming. And notice back in the background, you've got all of these, this landscape. He didn't do that just so he could practice landscape, but he was really trying to get across the idea that this story about Christ is not just localized in Bethlehem, but it's something that's going to go out and change the entire world. And so you kind of have a little bit of an Eden look back in the new paradise and the great things that are going to happen. This is the Adoration of the Shepherds by Gerard van Honthorst, a German. This is a little bit after the Reformation. Honthorst is still a Catholic, but he paints the Christ child. Not much about this except just to say you have the appearance. Notice back here in this particular painting, you have the donkey and the cow, the ox actually looking on. And you will see this in a lot of those kind of paintings because of Isaiah 1 and verse 3. The ox knows his master, and the donkey knows his manger, but Israel does not know. They do not recognize their God. And so you will have in a lot of these paintings, as Christ is born, you will have this donkey and this ox looking. In this particular case, you have the ox looking on. There's Joseph, very pleased, very relaxed, petting on his pet ox there. The ox is there just to say, this is a manger. This is not a hospital room. This is not a house. This is not anything other than a manger. This Christ child is born in poverty and born in kind of deprivation. But what I love about this painting is, where's all the light coming from? The light all comes from right here at this baby is shining this glory of God everywhere. And so his von Honthorst's idea of the nativity is the idea of the glory of God that's coming into the world. And that's what he intends for you to see. This is Ghirlandaio again, a different one called the Adoration of the Magi. And again, you have the kind of the Edenic background back here, but it's a little bit different because this is a pagan temple that has been turned into a manger. And so when Christ comes into the world, paganism begins to crumble, and paganism begins to be used for a lot of different things. You have John the Baptist, of course, here, and he's pointing toward the Christ child. You have babies around different places. This painting was put in an orphanage, was commissioned to decorate an orphanage. And so they focused on the slaughter of the innocents is what they really wanted a painting of. And so you have back up in this corner here, you have the depiction of the slaughter of the babies, but really what you have is the Magi coming, the young man, the middle-aged man, and the old man, rather than, nowadays you have the three wise men who are basically Caucasian and African and Asian. And, the idea is the whole world worships the Christ. But here you have the three stages of manhood, young man, middle-aged man, and old man. And they are all worshiping the Christ. And again, there's the donkey and the ox and all of that. But notice how even all of the ships are coming. They're not just parked out there in the middle of the cove, but they are coming this way. They're headed for the Christ child because the entire world is going to worship the Christ. And then you have finally actually there's two more that I wanted to show you. You have the Adoration of the Magi by Giotto. Giotto is kind of a real early painter. He stops painting iconography and he starts trying to include emotion. Notice what you have here. Here's this guy, he falls down at the feet of Jesus and he reaches up and he grabs the baby. And Mary says, hey, wait a minute. And so you have a little bit of emotion that begins to be shown, and all of these people are a little bit more individualized, and he's trying to paint people who are actually people. And what Giotto is saying is, this Christ is not a legend. This is not a myth. This is not anything other than real people encountering the real God who has come into the world. And so Giotto is, you have the rock of God. God is a mighty rock. Look at the Star of Bethlehem here. He conceives of the Star of Bethlehem as a comet. It fascinates me too what he thinks camels look like, but nevertheless, you just have all of this real worship that is taking place. And interestingly enough, this is one of the first 3D paintings. a painting where the artist, instead of just painting everything on a flat background, tried to make it 3D so that you could enter the painting and be a part of this painting and experience this event along with them. This is the Star of Bethlehem by Edward Burne-Jones in 1890. This is a watercolor. For a guy who spent his grade school years, when I draw a stick figure, often people say, "What is that?" That's as good as I can draw, you know. I remember spending grade school time trying to watercolor, and everything was always thin and washed out and kind of didn't look very good at all. This is watercolor. All of these brilliant, vibrant tones and vibrant colors. But this is Burne-Jones. This is in Cambridge, in one of the libraries in Cambridge. Of course, he has your wise men, and they are, they're beginning to be nationalized, so that you have the idea of the whole world. Joseph has been out gathering sticks and kind of surprised by these wise men walking up. These right here, by the way, are Star of Bethlehem flowers of some sort. But look at the angel. The angel is carrying the star. And so Burne-Jones imagines the star as being some special creation of God, so that the angel brings it in and comes down to the Christ child, who is, in this particular case, look how frightened that child is. Christ is kind of drawing away from this worship and this adoration that is being brought to him. And I kind of think that what Burne-Jones wants us to be thinking about is not just the idea of Christ being a new beginning, but remember where Christ is headed. I mean, Christ is not just headed to glory and wonderful things and happiness. He's headed to the cross. And all of this worship and adoration is eventually going to turn on the Christ. And so in some of these artists, you will have them depicting the Christ even being afraid or even being dead. There's one particular nativity painting that I don't have here that you wonder if the baby has miscarried, because the baby is wrapped not in swaddling clothes but in a burial shroud. And, but they're trying to get you to think about the significance. It's not just about the birth. It's not just about coming into the world in innocence. It's about the fact that Christ lives for God, and in this evil world, he is eventually crucified. And then, of course, raised to his glory. I don't know how you imagine it, but here is the story of the Magi and their worship of Jesus. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. Now, when I read that story, I always get to thinking about the star. What did that star look like? And where did it come from? And how did it look to the Magi? And how did it lead them to Bethlehem? The Magi are astrologers. Now, to me, that's kind of a shocking idea, that God would reveal such an important thing as the birth of Jesus to a group of people who are involved in something that he categorically forbids in Scripture. So here are these men who are involved in something that God does not approve of, and he is telling them the Christ, this king, has been born. Maybe, though, it's not quite as shocking as it might appear on a couple of accounts. First of all, these are men who are involved in watching the stars for portents of important things. Sort of like astronomers today who are so intent on seeking out new life. You know, they're trying to find planets where life might have evolved, finding life out there. There is some reason that these Magi are just sure that they have seen the King's star. They are just really convinced that this is a significant thing. God announces to the watchers of the heavens the birth of his Messiah. And not to the ones who are just wrapped up in dirt. You know, people that are standing around looking at the ground and only expecting ordinary, mundane things. We don't really expect God to do a whole lot. We're not expecting in our days God to do anything great. Here are these astrologers who are looking out and looking up and trying to see what God is doing, and God is revealing to them the birth of his Son. Secondly, maybe this event is sort of a judgment on the ones who should be affected most by this announcement. The Magi, these astrologers, they drop whatever they're doing and they rush off and travel great distances to worship this newborn king, while Herod, who is surrounded by high priests and he's surrounded by scribes of the law, instead of going to see the child, instead of being impressed by and worshiping the child, they try to kill him. I always wonder if any of these lawyers, these scribes, or if any of these priests ever went to try to find the child. If afterwards maybe they snuck down. It's clear that the Magi's search wasn't a secret, and the religious men knew exactly where to look. I wonder if they ever did. You know, that out of some kind of devotion or out of some kind of curiosity they would go and hunt, or if they just were relieved that Herod was taking care of a problem. There, we don't have to deal with that anymore. Anyway, these Magis were astrologers, and they watched the skies, and they watched the stars. What was it they saw? Was it, all kinds of things have been proposed about this. Was it a movement of a planet against the background of the stars that had some sort of message for these men that studied those sorts of things? Was it a strange conjunction of the planets? There's been speculation that there was some kind of an alignment of Jupiter and Saturn at this particular time that really would show up big and make people think that something was changing about the world. Was it the appearance of a new star? Was it a nova of some sort? You saw in Edward Burne-Jones's rendition the angel holding the star and moving it around, maybe a special creation of God that he is moving so that it leads these guys exactly where they're supposed to be. And then you saw in Giotto's painting the comet, you know, a portent, but a comet that was over the house where Jesus was. What the star makes me think of, though, is the vast reach of God. To take something so untamable, so huge, so far away, and to make it serve the purpose of announcing this event to some men in the Middle East somewhere. It makes me think of the incredible importance of what happened. The Savior has been born, and it takes this absolutely incredible celestial event to announce it. I mean, think about it for yourself. You pick out any star. Go out tonight if you can see the stars, and pick out any star and try to make it move at your command, or just make it blink. I mean, we know we can't affect the stars, and it's almost silly to even talk like that, but this is God's greatness. This is God's majesty and power, that the thing that is so great that we would just think silly in our own lives is the very thing that is possible with God. The star they had seen, says Matthew, when it rose, went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. And I think that says something about the vast reach of God's purpose and planning. The closest star we know about is a star called Proxima Centauri. Proxima Centauri is 4.2 light years away from the sun. And that means that basically when we look at Proxima Centauri, we are not seeing it as it is right at that moment, but we are seeing it as it was 4.5 years ago, 4.2 years ago. That's how far away it is. The light that travels at 186,000 miles per second, as it travels from Proxima Centauri, it takes 4.5 years to get here, so that what we're seeing is the way the star was that long ago. Most stars are a lot farther away than that, like the star Mu Cephei. If you know what you're looking at and know where to look, and I don't, but I'm just telling you what I know from reading about it. If you know what you're looking at, you can see it with a telescope. But it is 5,000 light years away, which means that you aren't seeing Mu Cephei as it is today. You're seeing it as it was 5,000 years ago. Now think about what's going on here. As the Magi are looking up at the sky, and they see a star over in the western sky, one they hadn't seen before. Let's say it was a star that was only 2,000 light years away, and its light is just now, after 2,000 years, reaching the earth. That would mean that God started the light on its way to earth 2,000 years ago. 2,000 years before the baby was born. 2,000 years before the wise men saw it. 2,000 years before it would ever affect anybody. 2,000 years, God has already set this in motion and already moving it forward. I've heard of 10-year plans and 20-year plans and 5-year plans, but a 2,000-year plan? I was talking to somebody just the other day, and they were talking about the company that they worked for wanting to do a strategic planning session for 17 years in the future. And he reached down and he pulled out his cell phone and he says, think how ridiculous that is. How long have we even had these? And you're trying to plan 17 years ahead to get everything to work and fit together, and we don't even know what kind of technology we're going to be dealing with in 17 years. Think about 2,000 years. Think about what it is for God to be able to move things around. Think about the fact that civilizations rise and fall and incredible inventions are developed and 500 generations come and go. But God brings about what He promised at exactly the right time. As these Magi are looking up in the sky, they see this star and it guides them to where the Christ has been born. Now, I don't know if that's exactly what happened with that star or not, but it makes me think. It makes me think about a statement like this. The lamb who was, well, apparently I've messed up. Hang on. I'll get there. There it is. The lamb who was slain from the creation of the world. Here is God planning ahead and God working and moving ahead. From the very creation of the world, when on the fourth day, and God said, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark sacred times and days and years, and let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. At the very beginning, God is planning, starting this thing on its way and getting it ready and getting it here. I think about Job, where God questions Job and said, where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footing set, or who laid its cornerstone, while the morning stars shouted together, morning stars sang together, and all the angels shouted for joy? From the very time that God creates the world, from the time that Adam and Eve eat the fruit, when they are driven out of the Garden of Eden because it wasn't right for them to be sinful and to live forever too, God drives them out of the garden. And then God says to the serpent who began all this trouble, and I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. And we recognize in that what God is doing is beginning this process, beginning this way of fulfilling His promises to undo what the serpent began. Already, God is planning and God is putting things into place, and He is working and He's moving this event around here, and He's putting this person in the right place here, and He's setting all of these things, these series of occurrences into motion, and maybe even lighting up the star whose light is going to reach the earth at exactly the right time. Just as sure as God is real, just as sure as God is reigning in heaven and on earth, nothing takes Him by surprise. Nothing fools Him. Nothing changes His plan. We saw His star when it rose, and we've come to worship Him. I think that's one of the great significant ideas about the birth of Christ. That God is controlling, and God is working, and God is doing what He has to do to keep His promises. Now, here's another thing in all of this. The star leads the wise men right straight to Jesus, even though God knows what Herod is up to. Think about how much cleaner it would have been if the wise men had never shown up in Jerusalem. They start asking questions. Where's the newborn king? Well, what king? Asked Herod. Where? And Herod is always suspicious about that sort of thing. His scribes say, Bethlehem, that's where this baby is going to be born. And now the babies in Bethlehem are in deep trouble, even if Jesus isn't. And they're even in worse trouble when the Magi avoid Herod and they go home a different way. Here are all of these children who suffer because the Magi have come to look up and to worship this particular new king. It impresses me that God never flinches from this kind of confrontation. You know, there's a part of me that wants to take this story and use it to rail at God. It just seems like God is more interested in having his son worship than he cares about all of those infant children of Bethlehem. Or that he's more interested in his son than he is in saving these defenseless children. And I can say that in a way that I think God is self-centered and tyrannical in his self-seeking. But maybe even that proves that I don't know God nearly as well as I would like to or as I should. Because this God who is worthy of my worship, who is more than worthy of my worship, even in the face of such horrifying events as the slaughter of the innocents. I hear Job railing at God about the unfairness of it all. Job has lost his wealth, and he's lost his standing in the community, and he's lost his wife, and maybe worst of all, he's lost his children. And so he will say, even today, my complaint is bitter. His hand is heavy in spite of my groaning. If only I knew where to find him. If only I could go to his dwelling. I would state my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would find out what he would answer me and consider what he would say to me. And he goes on to say that he is sure that the Lord would realize his mistake and suddenly make everything better. But, Job says, he stands alone. And who can oppose him? He does whatever he pleases. He carries out his decree against me, and many such plans he still has in store. That's why I am terrified before him. When I think of all this, I fear him. God has made my heart faint. The Almighty has terrified me. And I'm not silenced by the darkness, by the thick darkness that covers my face. In other words, Job says, I'm going to stand right up to God, and I'm going to tell him how wrong he's been, and I'm going to tell him how awful he has been, and I'm going to tell God he needs to fix this because I say so. And then the Lord comes to Job. And that's the very thing that Job has hoped for. The Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. And he said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will answer you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. And he goes on with question after question after question and poses problem after problem. He demands that Job give a demonstration of how great his wisdom is and how Job can possibly prove God in the wrong, until Job finally says simply, I know that you can do all things, and no purpose of yours can be thwarted. You ask, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I didn't understand, things too wonderful for me to know. You said, listen now, and I will speak. I will question you, and you shall answer me. My ears have heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself, and I repent in dust and ashes. You know, there may not be an answer to why God allows the murder of all of these innocent babies, except for the evil of Herod. But God is worthy in spite of it all, because God is greater than any evil, any suffering, any despair that we might have to face. Maybe Ghirlandaio has a deeper understanding of this than we might give him credit for in the adoration of the Magi. Right down at the bottom, right there, there's one and there's two. There's two little children who are kneeling in worship to the Christ child. And this is not really surprising, since Ghirlandaio painted this work for an orphan's home. And you've got to include, some little foundling children in there as well. One expert says that these two children represent the orphans as two babies who have escaped from Herod's slaughter. But I don't think that's right. I think that these babies are two of the children who were actually killed in the murders. they are wearing halos, which shows that to Ghirlandaio they have some special holiness. And I think that these children have been killed by Herod's soldiers in this incredible act of utmost cruelty. But here they are now at the feet of Jesus, worshiping the Christ child. Maybe this proves something else as well. God is shameless in giving even Herod a second chance, a real chance. Here is Herod, this cruel, power-mad, almost insane character. He murders his wife. He slaughters his children. The Emperor Augustus said of Herod, "I would rather be Herod's pig than his son." Because Herod would never, as a practicing Jewish believer, Herod would never slaughter a pig, but he killed his sons every time he got a chance. This star leads these Magi directly to Herod, who learns that a new king has been born. He is this long-awaited Messiah, the Savior of Israel, and Herod faces a real choice. Will he, like the Magi, is he going to fall down and worship this child as the king of the Jews, or is he going to stay the same old Herod and try to kill it? Well, we know what he did, but God gave him that real chance to be different once for all. It was a big risk. It may turn out that Herod won't respond at all and turn out good, but he will turn out to be unspeakably evil and kill a whole bunch of innocent children. But God is willing to take that sort of risk in trying to reach even Herod. And he is willing to absorb the rage that might be flung at him over the death of these children. Not as though he's just willing to I'll throw away a few kids if I can reach Herod, because Herod seems to be so important. But that God is utterly shameless in the lengths that he will go to save you and me, even if it means giving up his only son on a cross. I think that's the message of the Star of Bethlehem, that God has entered this world, the world where angry old men kill babies, and where mothers cry in agony and rage and bitter grief. This world where God is accused and ignored. God has gotten his hands dirty so you and I can be saved. We go back to this particular painting. I'm not sure if I have it here again. No, I don't. Go back up to that painting there, would you, that we just had up? Take a look at that one more time. Do you notice what the manger is? Oh, that's the wrong one. Let's see. What do I want here? I don't have it. Oh, there it is. Okay. Take a look at the manger here. Do you recognize that manger? That's not like any manger I've ever seen. You know, we always have these mangers presented in wood and all this kind of stuff. That's a sarcophagus. That is where the baby Jesus is being laid for Ghirlandaio. I think in a brilliant way he is showing that the birth of Christ implies the death of Christ as well. This child Jesus, who is worshipped by Magi with gifts worthy of a king, is the Son of God who dies for you and me. And as we celebrate this particular Christmas season, this idea of honoring the birth of Christ, I think we need to respond the appropriate way, in remembering also that this Christ is the one who is going to save his people from their sins by dying for us. And we need to worship in the appropriate way, the way of the Star of Bethlehem, and fall down and worship Jesus. Let's stand and let's sing. If you need to come to Christ, please come.